Thanks, Chair. Mr. Jakes, thanks for being here. Would you agree that the industrial carbon tax adds a cost down the line, down the value chain, which ultimately adds a cost that the consumer at the end has to pay?
Theoretically, any tax within the system will ultimately increase the end prices of the goods that are being sold.
Thank you. So, for example, steel, the industrial carbon tax. If there's an increase in the cost to that, it would cost more to.
Mr. Halan, is this going towards the
Absolutely.
tax havens? Yeah. Thank you.
It would. So, in the case of steel, industrial carbon tax goes up in price, which means the vehicles that transfer the food or the farmers who buy, let's say, a farming equipment, that goes up in cost. That doesn't necessarily show up in a grocery bill, but it does increase the cost, and at the end, a consumer could pay the increased cost along the value chain, correct?
We haven't recently studied this issue, and before I respond to that question, I'm happy to go back to my theoretical response. Before I responded to the actual question, the concrete question, I want to go back and actually conduct a bit of analysis on the issue.
That'd be great.
Because as everyone is aware, carbon pricing, while it is one of the most effective ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it is very complex in terms of the pricing, the application to goods, as well as the rebate system and other offsets.
Okay, I just have one more question based on that. When we see the rising price of groceries everywhere right now, and we've established that any input costs to, let's say, farm equipment, ultimately, when the farmer goes to grow our food, it would increase that cost, and the person who's shipping that food to the grocery store, it would increase their cost if they're buying a truck.
Mr. Halan, I do have to ask, is this related to tax havens?
Yeah, I'll get there. At the end of the day, when any Canadian goes to buy groceries, there's not necessarily a line item that says industrial carbon tax, but there is a cost that increases on Canadians' everyday buying, correct, at the grocery store?
Again, theoretically and in isolation, that might be the case. I would go back. I read through, as I'm sure most people in this room did, the statement from the Governor of the Bank of Canada with respect to his economic update this morning. And he pointed out the fact that within the economy, there are very complex factors that actually hit the bottom lines of households, one of them being the exchange rate, the other one being import propensities. So it's important to look at everything together.
Fair. Okay. In relation to tax havens and the impact that it has on Canada's fiscal position today, and with the budget coming up next week, we see that the government is going to set out some type of vision of what a capital expense is. But will this accounting trick not make it easier to spend more with less transparency?
Thanks for the question. So we published a note on this several weeks ago, and one of the things that we highlighted is that the government isn't taking anything away. So while they are going to be presenting their spending plan by dividing spending into the two new categories, capital and operating, the old categories, so everything that we've grown to know and love, will still be there and still be available for us to analyze.
And at the end of the day, the debt is still the debt. The total cost is still the total cost. It doesn't matter whether we split it into different categories or we create different line items for it. At the end of the day, the debt is still the total debt at the end.
Yeah. Wait. Yes. And I'd say something we flagged in the note is that the definition of capital, from our perspective, seems very broad. So it's much broader than we see in other jurisdictions.
Which is why I asked, isn't this a form of, it won't be transparent?
Mr. Halan, how is this related to the current study?
I'll get there.
Another point I actually made at the Government Operations Committee was this is the approach the government has indicated they're taking internally to make budgeting decisions, and it's very transparent that the way in which they're making decisions internally is also the way in which they're going to be communicating that information to parliamentarians.
Well, the
Thank you, Mr. Halan. You have, that concludes the time, so thank you. We will now
For
go.
a report released today called Planned Capital Spending under Canada's Defence Policy 2025 Update, you outline new defense expenditures that were not included in your September economic and fiscal outlook. Taking this additional spending into account, what are Canadians now facing in terms of a projected deficit?
Well, I think as we mentioned in the September economic and fiscal outlook, one of the major areas of spending which we weren't in a good position to actually provide, around which we weren't in a good position to provide an estimate, was the difference. The government's commitment to a 5% NATO commitment. So we were focused on the 2%. The difference between the 2 and the 5%, we didn't, and we continue not to have enough detail at this point. It is at this juncture, it's unclear how much of the additional spending will overlap with other areas of spending. But suffice it to say, I think going back to the testimony that I offered at the Government Operations Committee, it would be tens of billions of dollars of additional spending.
But what does that do to the projected deficit then? Do you have
it would increase the deficit.
Do you have a rough estimate in terms of a number?
I do not. If you wait, we're planning on publishing after the budget, about 10 days after the budget, we'll be publishing a budget issues note, and at that point, we'll be in a good position to provide you with a number.
Okay, so right now, you just mentioned tens of billions of dollars of additional spending, meaning most likely going straight into the deficit. If the government refuses to rein in spending, then what are the intergenerational consequences? Are we effectively passing today's bills to our children?
Well, from an intergenerational perspective, it depends on how the deficits are financed or what the deficits look like, because of course what we published in September was a baseline, and we have to wait until November 4th to see how the government responds to that baseline. The government's already indicated that it plans on restraining and potentially cutting spending. It's already announced some additional measures. There could potentially be additional revenue measures that would close the deficit as well. The other point, and I think the other key point is, I think everyone at this point has been sensitized to the idea that the deficits are going to be potentially substantial for the next 2 to 3 years. The real question, and the question that I've raised, is what happens in years 3, 4, and 5? So the highlighting the debt to GDP ratio and the path of the debt to GDP ratio, the concerning aspect of it was that in the outer years, it continued to increase. So the economy was not growing fast enough to actually pay for the growth in debt, outstanding debt.
Thank you, Mr.
stock.
Jakes. That concludes that time period for there. Sorry, it was 3 minutes. Yeah.